All right, it's quarter past 12, so we'll get started. My name's Tristan Harwood. I teach in critical and theoretical studies here at the VCA and into honours. Myself and Nadine are standing in for David while he's away doing some of these intros. Um, and so, as an Indigenous person, it's my cultural responsibility to acknowledge that we meet on Bunurong country and to state that my relationship to the unceded territory of the Bunurong and the Wurundjeri of the Kulin Nations is that of a guest. I respect the country-based practices and attendant forms of knowledge that are based on deep reciprocity, inherently informed by intimate relationships to this place that have been continued through kinship relations, songlines, and artistic practices for millennia. The unceded Bunurong territory that we are on holds the relationships that inform Bunurong lifeways and nationhood and provides the ground for political, cultural, and artistic practices that sustain the Kulin nations. The land is the basis for the conceptualization and articulation of ways of being and for the knowledge and the spirit that emboldens these nations to critically interrogate and challenge colonialism and capitalism and the associated socio-ecological disaster brought about by imposed political and economic systems on this land. And I'm honoured here today to be able to introduce to you all Ali Gamilia Baker. Dr. Ali Gamilia Baker is is a woman of the Mirning Nation which is based around the Nullarbor. She's an associate professor in Indigenous Studies and Creative Arts who brings curatorial knowledge of study of Indigenous histories and art scholarship, including her work as part of the Unbound Collective for Aboriginal artists, activists, and academics whose work engages Aboriginal community members who historically have been contained and excluded to speak back to colonial institutions. At the heart of Ali's research and extensive exhibition history as an artist is a concern for the intergenerational transmission of sovereign Indigenous knowledge, our willingness to examine and contest colonial archives, and tending to the contours of memory. Ali is here at the University of Melbourne as part of the McGeorge Fellowship, and we're especially blessed to have the opportunity to see her work in the exhibition, The Ocean Remembers, at the Fiona and Sydney Meyer Gallery, which will open on Friday, the 30th of May, in a few weeks. So thank you, Ali.
Thank you, Tristan. Thank you so much, Tristan. It's so wonderful to be here. And it's with deep respect that I also acknowledge and honour the sovereign lands and territories of Bunurong and Woiwurrung people, the Wurundjeri of the Kulin Nation, this beautiful country where we are located today. I acknowledge the infinite beauty of this country. I also acknowledge all of the important Indigenous political leadership, movements of sovereignty, resistance, and creative work led by the Koori community of this place that continues to inspire and sustain us. I acknowledge this as a Mirning person whose matriarchal family come from the Nullarbor, desert sea country with deep underground caves and infinite connections to the sky and to the outer world. I also acknowledge Kaurna community and the broader Nunga community of Tuntanya, Adelaide, where I was born and continue to live and work. I want to thank you for bringing me for this McGeorge Fellowship, and I want to thank Professor Lisa Slade and all of the deadly, beautiful people that I've met from the university, from the art school, from the art history department, and all of the incredible hosting that I've had in my week that I've been, well, it's only a few days, but I'm here for a week. So it's been really beautiful to be here. I also want to thank all of the incredible artists of Yirramboi, and I've managed to, over the last couple of days, see some incredible work, including the Black Woman of Gippsland, Black Women's Healing, and shout out to beautiful Palabala, and the Ashnabe, the Seventh Fire. And as well, I have also, a few weeks ago, had the honour of giving some opening words for Kimberly Martin in the exhibition, the Tarawara Biennial, We Are Eagles. So today I'm just going to share, I guess, some provocations, and I'm going to kind of also acknowledge the film that you've just had on in the background is part of an installation by Unbound Collective, which includes myself, Dr. Faye Roses Blanche, Dr. Natalie Harkin, and Dr. Simone Ulol-Couture. And Simone is Yangunjara, Faye is Yinjima Barbram, and Natalie is Naranga. And so we work together and perform together, but also teach together and have taught together at Flinders University in Adelaide for the last, well, I've been there for 25 years teaching our histories. And it's been an honour to do that work, but also incredibly challenging space of critical Indigenous studies. And we teach all of the kind of degree programs at Flinders. We teach education students, social workers, criminologists, creative arts students, and public health students. So we are engaged deeply in the issues relating to what is important to know about our histories, but then also, and what is useful, but then also how to live with them or honour our histories in ways that are meaningful for our communities, because a lot of what happens within universities has not and continues to not impact on the crisis that a lot of my communities face. And that has been, an incredibly important aspect of the kind of ways in which we've engaged with critical Indigenous studies, but also creative arts. And you'll hear a bit about that now. So I just want to acknowledge that this is, I think, one of the oldest living beings on Garnayata. It's a 1,000-year-old shelter tree that's still alive, and it is just on the edge of Paramount country, so on the kind of edge of Nanu, the sleeping giant, which is the Adelaide Hills. And when I had the opportunity to speak with a lot of elders, so I've spoken with Ghana elder, Uncle Lewis Yellowburka O'Brien, about these beautiful shelter trees and, the kind of journeying of our communities across country before white people came here. So this is what a lot of Aboriginal people might describe as a witness tree as well. It's witnessed everything that's come, and it currently has a caravan park surrounding it. So it's kind of loved in there a little bit, and you can sit inside this tree, and you can lean your face up against its. So there's evidence of thousands of fires, and Uncle Lewis would describe to me how, especially during hot times, when it's really hot, people would travel at night, and young men often would run, and you could run along the waterways, and there were these shelter trees to rest in, that you could have a little fire inside. And then there are other trees that were marked that would show you the way, or other trees that were marked that had water in them. Sometimes if you went off the creek, way, then there would be other trees that had contained water, right? And so this incredible understanding about the hospitality of trees, the possibility of our relationality across this beautiful continent, which really has in some ways been impacted badly by things like native title, which only asks for communities to talk about their own group, but not about necessarily all of those neutral pathways, but also our relationality with each other. So I'm going to talk a little bit. So I just want to honour this old one and the wisdom of those trees. And then I also want to honour my beautiful family. And this one I can see, so on the right of your screen, you can see my nana May, and she's holding one of my mum's siblings, one of my mum's older siblings there. And next to her is my great-grandfather, who's a white fella, and he had 2 Aboriginal wives. And in the middle here is my great-grandmother, Camellia, who I was named after. And I think she had 2 families too. And this is taken out of Penong, which is not far from Ceduna, but it's still about 500 kilometres from where my great-grandmother was born. And she used to just walk with her dogs. You can see some of her dogs there and her gun. She'd just take off and go to other parts of her country, which she knew really well. Next to her is her son, my grandfather, Jack, who's my nana's brother, who was just about to serve in a war where he still wasn't recognised as being a person with citizen rights. So it's not ironic that we are in the Federation Hall and that Federation in this country, the writing of the Constitution of this country deliberately excluded Aboriginal people from having any kind of human rights within that. So part of what Unbound Collective does and has done, so we've been working for 10 years together, and we just recently had a survey show called Sovereign Acts Love Praxis, and it brought together a lot of installation work over the 10 years that we've been collaborating. And it was, so it was 2014 when I'd been to art school and finished in 1996 with an honours degree in Adelaide, and then I did a master's in screen filmmaking, film production. And then I'd basically abandoned art because I felt it was superficial. And it was only in 2014 I really seriously returned with my sisters as a non-individualistic practice, which was really about the ideas that we had been grappling with in teaching our history. So the first parts of our work, they unfold in a series of sovereign acts and are really engaged in kind of iterative, but also thinking about, so the first iteration, Act 1 of the Sovereign Acts, was really imagining our families and communities that we'd all been researching that were contained within the South Australian Museum and the Colonial Archives, and really smashing down our feelings and responses to those representations, not only in the museum and the library and the state records, but also in the media. So Faye does a response to Andrew Bolt's It's So Hip to Be Black here, and we've done a whole lot of kind of responses to the kind of violent attempted seizure of our family's bodies, blood, bones, hair, measurements, things that they tried to use to support a kind of now abandoned race science, which is also kind of implicated at this university as well. So important conversations about eugenics, assimilation policies, segregation, and the kind of justification of of indentured labour and slavery. We then moved to the inaugural Tarnandy 2015, and this is like a very important ceremonial response to what you could describe as whitefella sorcery disguised as science, where they took when you take people's bones, hair and blood and keep it in a shed for thousands of years, or hundreds of years, sorry, I shouldn't say thousands, it's going to come out eventually. But the relationship to this kind of idea of humanity becomes really important conversation. So we projected love poems onto it housed the Colonial Army, the Armoury building, and also had our family's protector records projected onto the State Library of South Australia. So again, and then we have dear Uncle Lewis, who's 95, the oldest living Kaurna person. He smoked out this area, which is kind of in between the museum, the armoury, the library, the Migration Museum, the Art Gallery of South Australia. It's a really potent and what they describe in Adelaide as the cultural precinct. So we made a response because at the moment, the museum markets this as a wedding venue with no label on the building at all. Okay, I'll just keep going. So some of you have seen parts of this. There was also an ongoing collection which is still going, and I am going to be exhibiting them very soon again, of racist texts, which is kind of a very broad and important kind of conversation about the canon and about the reproduction of particular sets of ideas that either totally attempt to erase Indigenous peoples or speak about us in abhorrent ways. And so these are kind of like, there's an endless supply of these kinds of texts that really kind of try and build a settler colony identity, but are very fragile in their capacity to have any kind of depth. A lot of these texts are now being thrown out of libraries and people's homes and find their way into secondhand shops. So it becomes this kind of important conversation about a decolonising that just erases is actually what Natalie would describe and we all describe as a cleansed archive. So this is actually our very recent, very violent history, and it's really important that we have an understanding of how we came to be where we are. So this is an ongoing kind of installation that I put in at various times. So the first section of our work, and I don't know, did I introduce the Permeate film? I can't remember if I... So I'll come back to the film that you saw at the beginning. But the first section of Unbound's work was really thinking about how we imagine and inhabit the uncomfortable knowledge of being collected and subsumed, and making our way out of these kind of ideas that attempt to kind of bind us up. And from experience, the coloniser's archive can make you very unwell. You can drown, you can get trapped, you can get, as Derrida would say, you can get a fever, an archive fever. It can make your bones ache, or you feel a bit sick, or there's something not right. You can lose your way, you can go off on too many tangents, you can go mad, you can become broken. It's dangerous in there. But then you find something and you find a trace of what you're looking for, which might be your ancestors or your family, or the absence. You find a shape of an absence in the archive that is the shape of your ancestor, and you understand what that means. And I found it useful to kind of start just thinking about, because the archive is not linear and it is a fragmented mess, I found it really useful to try to kind of not get too fixed on a particular way, because you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you haven't come across. And so sometimes it's really important to kind of open yourself up to whatever it is, and then okay, work out when is the right time to pull back. And I think working collectively has allowed us to have a degree of what some people might describe as kind of a cultural responsiveness. So if we couldn't do it for ourselves, sometimes we would help each other as Aboriginal women. We'll know when we're going too far and we pull each other back, or we know when it's really important to be brave, and we do that together, because sometimes the things that we did I wouldn't have done on my own. I just wouldn't have been brave enough. So we became, and because we've all been raised by groups of very political Aboriginal women, and a lot of those old people have gone now, we know that it's our time to do that work too. I'll just flick through. So the work Permeate that you saw at the beginning is actually part of an installation that we made during COVID that honours Yartabalti, which is Port Adelaide place of sleep, and it's a 10,000-year-old mangrove forest. And during COVID, there's a salt field which extends like about 50 kilometres up the coast towards Port Augusta, or towards anyway, it extends right up to the foot of Narungga country, to the end of Dana Yada. And when the colonists came, they called the mangroves, or they called it Port Misery, because they had to wade through the mud. And they've ripped out huge amounts of them. But what we know, what ecologists tell us, is that mangroves provide about a quarter of the oxygen for the planet. They're a huge carbon well. They are fish nurseries. This one is a dolphin sanctuary. It provides an enormous amount of life and energy, and it is incredibly magical and beautiful. And so we spent time inside the mangrove forest, but you can also see where it was poisoned, because the last owner of the salt field lost control of this salty brine and poisoned a huge amount of this tiny bit that's left. So part of the kind of work is thinking about how you protect where you live, how you honour what is in front of you, and how you work with community to seek justice and sustainability, which I would describe as a decolonial practice, or a practice of engaging with all aspects of the world that you are part of, and that kind of relationality that comes with that. So the work seeks to engage and honour critical creative praxis, sovereign collectivity, and refusal as a methodological form of the work of First Nations and Black feminist activist struggle and minority communities all over the world. So Unbound Collective work seeks to hold space within institutions that seek to erase and destroy, whilst we call and respond to our ancestors and those who are yet to arrive. We consider the limits of our humanness, what justice wants, and intergenerational creative relationality. So this photo I took to honour the work of some really important Black scholars coming out of the US, in particular Tina Camp and Catherine McKintrick, who, as well as, there's so many of them, but Tina Camp wrote an article called The Loophole of Retreat. And so we're really thinking about kind of agency and grief, and the kind of the possibility of continuing to be really strong and be really loving, and see what was incredibly important to continue to honour and fight for. So this is Loophole Shelter with Faye Roses Blanche, my deadly colleague, and it's coral, and really thinking about, because she's from, her country comes down onto what is called the Great Barrier Reef, and it's also just about the kind of the oceans. This is another work that's relating to to that, the practice. And these ones here, these skirts here are really like, we call them skins, but they are, they contain some of our family's protector records, some of the most abhorrent kind of disgusting things that have been written, but also resistance poetry, love songs. It's all there on our bodies, and really thinking about what truth might look like, because there's a lot of discussion about truth telling, but Lisa and I had the honour of speaking to all the Supreme Court judges of Australia and New Zealand at the beginning of the year. I don't know how she wrote me into that. I didn't really understand what was going to happen, but they were all there in the room. It was quite intense, and my heart started beating really wildly. My watch was saying, "Oh, are you okay? You're having an incident." But it was like, so with the conversation that I tried to have with these judges was around this whole notion of how we understand, once you have the truth, what are you going to do with it? Because a lot of Aboriginal people have the truth. We know the truth about our histories. We can find it. It's there. It's all very well documented. But it's actually about then, so how do I teach about that to my kids without them wanting to go absolutely ballistic? How do I teach with love? Or how do we look after our health within those spaces of deep, genocidal understandings? How do we understand and learn from attempted annihilation, and what does it mean to be human and live on the planet at the moment? And these are, questions that we should be continually asking ourselves within spaces like universities. This is the space for dialogue as a place to resolve our understandings or to disagree. It's a place for critical understandings as opposed to violence and dictatorships. Because, we can see that either we have those really deep and complex conversations, or we can see what happens when we lose the capacity to even be able to speak at all, that you have a really dangerous kind of environment, community. So those questions and the kind of way we might decolonise policy, the way we might decolonise public space, our governance systems, everything that we're engaged with as humans needs to be kind of open. And so part of this work was really engaging with that kind of emotional impact of these ideas as we understood them, but also honouring, I guess, cultural theory, which is so important. So this is Catherine McKittrick, who I would encourage you to read. She's got like a selection of small essays, which is this one, Dear Science and Other Stories. It's just so amazingly beautifully written that she says things like, if we are committed to anti-colonial thought, our starting point must be one of disobedient relationality that always questions and thus is not beholden to normative academic logics. This means our method making may not take us where we want to go, but it will take us, as Glissant writes, to an unknown that does not terrify. And for me, to abandon some of the kind of projected vision, or to reject or to refuse that projected vision of our futures, our collective futures, our planetary futures, requires us to be open to outside of the disciplines, or the way the disciplines are speaking to each other. Because as knowledge centres, the disciplines of knowledge that the West offers up have not provided the answers thus far of what we're going to do collectively. So it does require creativity, it does require risk-taking, and I would say also I'm a mum, and so I've got little children, and so that in violence, the very old and the very young are the first to kind of suffer, and also those who can't speak, like all of the creatures and trees and stuff. So, we need to be able to plan for kind of peaceful radical change. And so I ask students to really think about, what does planning for peaceful radical change look like if you had the opportunity to really imagine that. And it does involve critical conversation. It involves disagreeing. It involves discomfort, but it doesn't necessarily involve other. Letharba King states that each form of violence has its own way of containing, haunting, touching, caressing, and whispering to another form of violence. Slavery and genocide is not contained. Like liquid, it lingers and seeps into the spaces and places we do not expect and cannot yet see or define. So artists have the capacity to be able to sensitively understand other kind of resonances that are happening within society and be able to read those kind of, the capacity to be able to speak about those in different kinds of ways. And that's a really important and dangerous sometimes job. I just wanted to quote my beautiful auntie, Irene Watson, Professor Irene Watson, because I'm going to show you, I don't know how I'm going for time. I'm going to show you, this is the massacre map that Lyndall Ryan, who's passed away now, a non-Indigenous academic, spent a good part of the later part of her life putting together, and it has very clear definitions of what a massacre is. It's 6 or more. Everything is really, really accounted for on the Colonial Archive. So you can click, it's an interactive map, so you can click on any of these dots and it will drill you down into exactly where you can find the reference to what happened there, the Google Earth image of what happened there. And for South Australia, because there doesn't look like there was many there, there's another alternative map, which is the frontier map done by another set of historians. From my perspective as an artist and also someone who teaches our histories, I've challenged a lot of the academics within my institution. What are you going to do with this? I asked the judges, what are you going to do about the foundational politic or the foundational laws of a country which is set up on this myth of a peaceful settlement, when we can see exactly how violent, how absolutely criminal and unlawful it was? How do Aboriginal people respond to seeing that? How do they imagine that our communities feel about the lack of addressing of what Lyndall Ryan so kindly dived into the archive to get? And a lot of the time you met with silence when you asked that question. So Auntie Irene, Professor Irene Watson, who's Tangal, Miatang and Boundig, says, in a dream where there is no fear of retribution, Nungas face the Australian state and ask, by what lawful process have you come into being? Who are you really? And the state responds, international law, an act of state, says the High Court. And it is through doctrines of state supremacy, conjure magic, which absolves centuries of unlawfulness and violence against Indigenous peoples. The question, now terra nullius after Mabo is known to be dead, is what constitutes the state? The question is met with silence of an unrecognised violence, a power of the state to annihilate all that is different. Without answering the question, the state offers a process of reconciliation, one which leaves intact the scars of annihilation, one which refuses to give restitution for the loss of country and life, and it continues to bore deeper into the earth and to the Nunga being. So when we're thinking about the difficulties of working into these spaces, these questions that continually should be part of the work, and also thinking about the ways in which the administration and economics, so I teach a topic called Colonial Intimacies and the Economy, Mathematics of Genocide, which is really honouring some of Catherine McKittrick's work around Black women and cartographies of struggle. So she talks about the kind of numeration And, you know, when we look at that map, the massacre map, so, you know, Catherine McKittrick says in 2004, the toll of deaths and violence housed in the archive affirmed Black deaths, and thus she asked, how do we ethically engage with mathematics and numerical certainties that compile a fair and honour bits and pieces of Black death? So every year the government releases the Closing the Gap report, which has these statistics, and all of them are a deficit. And it's almost become part of our identities as Aboriginal people that we have all of the deficit statistics and numbers associated with us, and we're looked down upon by those who are economically surviving in very difficult spaces. Potentially, you know, I see a lot of the kind of misunderstanding about who we are as people or what's happened to us. But I think, you know, the questions around the capacity of economics or the capacities of particular forms of administration to be able to solve the issues that face us, not just our communities, but, you know, everyone, really does need to, you know, we need to be really interrogating those systems. So everyone who's thinking about who we are and how we live should be also making it your business to read broadly and to read critically in relation to how we might shift those systems of power. I won't go into that one. So I'm part of this really beautiful project called Reimagining Humanities Through Indigenous Creative Arts, and I have the deadly Dr. Lou Bennett, who is at this university, the deadly Dr. Romaine Morton, who is at, I think, doing a postdoc at RMIT now, the incredible Professor Katarina Tiwa, who's, I think, the only Pacifica professor in the country, in this continent, who's an incredible dancer out of ANU, and as well as Simone, Natalie and myself. And we've been engaged in this kind of series of thinking about workshops about how our methodologies, the old people changed the way, how the country, what the country wants to tell us. And so we're on Lou's country here. And I just want to acknowledge the incredible work of Linda Tway-Smith, who's, you know, in this keynote says, we moved into a space of claiming theory and method. In other words, claiming the tools of research and refashioning them in our own image, refashioning these tools as our tools and reconnecting these tools to our past to understand that we've always had very research active ancestors. This kind of idea of what our inquiry should be about, which is, you know, in this Denson and Lincoln Handbook of Critical and Indigenous Methodologies, they suggest that our inquiry should be ethical, performative, healing, transformative, decolonising and participatory. They must be committed to dialogue, community, self-determination and cultural autonomy, must meet people's perceived needs, must resist efforts to confine the inquiry to a single paradigm or interpretive strategy, must be unruly, disruptive, critical and dedicated to the goals of justice and equity. Okay, I know that I'm just running out. I've got 4 minutes left, so I wanted to tell you a bit of a story. And I'll just come off that for a second. So I've been trying to get this death mask of my great-grandmother out of the museum, and it's almost an impossible project because they've reproduced it so many times. And it's been sent places and I don't know where, and I could spend my life kind of going mad trying to find it. But part of like what's been kind of speaking to me recently is that they have this Merning piece of meteorite in the South Australian Museum. It's the largest meteorite that's ever fallen to the earth in this country, and it's the 11th largest in the world, like the heart of a kind of a asteroid. And I've been looking at it for a long time because I don't go into the museum. I stand out the front with the students and I send them in if they want. it's been talking to me, and there's two other pieces of this one meteorite, which is 24 tons in total, and they took it in 1966 from the Nullarbor, and it's just like where one of my nanas lived at Mundrabilla. And I started researching meteorites and just looking at them, and then I found this Royal Society of Geology from Perth, 1996, and it shows, anyway, it's just talking, there's like stony meteorites and iron meteorites, and anyway, so when I used to ask my nanas, tell me a Manning story, when I was little, they'd always tell me about the little people from outer space, and I'd be like, oh my gosh. They'd always had a few beers and would play music, and it was kind of like, I thought, oh, but then I saw this map and I realised that they weren't drunk. They were telling me. Anyway, so this is the map of the meteorite falls that observed. So it means that someone's observed them falling or found in what is called Australia. So as you can see really clearly that is the boundary, that black blob there, where the 350 or 70 meteorites that they've got there counted, that's like the borders of Meaning Country. That's basically Meaning Country. It outlines it really well, and it made me laugh so much because the geologists try to explain why they don't really have a very good explanation. And there's another interactive map that you can find which shows meteorite falls in the whole planet. And that place in America where they, wear tinfoil hats and everyone sees UFOs, that's another place where there's huge amounts of meteorite falls, like uncannily. Maybe it's magnetic, who knows what, but our old people had a circular story which spans the whole of the country, and it relates to the stars, and it talks about the creation of the whole country. And then the story goes up to the stars, and then it comes back down, and then the story goes again. So for me, when I look at this map, I see a kind of a maintenance of a circular time, of a circular story, of like a story that spanned, was so intricate and so beautiful. And if you've ever had a chance to listen to any of the Inma of the Seven Sisters, you would know how beautiful that story is. And it's a mapping story. It's a story about the whole earth and how it was created. And it also was regularly maintained on this country for millennia. And somehow the meteorites show us something else. And for me, that just made me so happy. And so I wanted to give you that gift as well of like the unknown and the unknowable, perhaps. Most of those meteorites have been stolen from our country, unfortunately. So our little sisters have been lost around the world, but I really think about this maintenance of these stories. It's the ideas that are important, yeah? It's the ideas, it's the way that we connect with each other. It's very important, and I really wish you all the very best and give you my sincere love and respect, and thanks so much for being here today with me. Thanks.
Thanks so much for that deadly presentation, Ali. The amazing stories and art that you've shared with us today. Really could not find a clearer kind of demonstration of the need in art, practice, and theory to be met with critical Indigenous studies. So often we hear these terms that Ali has spoken through, truth-telling, native title, closing the gap, reconciliation, but less frequently we hear or read or are shown a critical examination of these terms, which is done with thought care and rigor in a way such as Ali has. And I personally really appreciate it. And I think there's so much here in this presentation that for people to, kind of run with.
Thank you, Tristan. Thanks. I don't know what's the time? What time do you have to leave now? Is it cut off time, or what does people feel?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I'm happy to have, thank you, and I'm happy to have a yarn. I also had this other slide, which was really honouring this incredible little video by Eve Tark called "I Do Not Want to Haunt You, But I Will," which every time I watch it, I just love it. And it's half an hour, so it's on Vimeo. So if you want to check it out, it's part of an eFlux education thing. I'd highly recommend listening to Eve. But also, I just wanted to also highlight another theorist who's a microplastic scientist, and Max Liboron, I can never say their name properly, and this idea of grappling with bad relations. So they talk about plastic as a bad relation, that we all have bad relations and that we need to, try and manage them. But also the kind of way that they engage with a decolonial lab is quite stunning. It's stunning about a stunning way of kind of thinking about a handbook of a decolonial workspace, how we start to be human in our interactions and our knowledge production, but also ethical. Yeah. So I just wanted to make those offerings and then open it up to anyone who wants to. I don't know, we haven't got a roving mic thing. Oh, we do. Oh, there. So if you want to ask a question, you can. I'm happy to yarn. Otherwise, you can. Oh, yeah. Hi. Does it work? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alan. It's such an inspiring book. And I picked up on the way you talked about relationality a few times. And I just wondered if you could speak a bit more about how in Unfound Collective that becomes kind of, I don't know if methodology is the right word, or how would you concretely describe that as an intentional practice?
Sure. For us and for many Aboriginal people, Indigenous peoples, relationality is very much about an ongoing commitment to the knowledge and how you come to the knowledge, but also an ethical standing with that. So if you're an Aboriginal person, it starts with who you are and who your mob are and what your politic is. But for anyone, it is also about understanding and being able to articulate your identity, your political relationship to power and knowledge production, and your ongoing commitment to that work. Outside of what might be a 9-to-5 job or a project, a relationality is a lived being. So that's my take on it. And it's, people might call it skin in the game. You got any skin in the game? How are you actually impacted by the knowledge and the repercussions of the knowledge? And have you thought that through? Yeah. Anyone else? Does anyone? There's other blackfellas in the room who might have really deadly responses to that, and they might want to suggest anything else. But that's what I think about when I think about it. Yeah. Any other question? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was really amazing. Spoke at the start about how you sort of took a break from making art for a few years, and I'm wondering about what prompted you to come back to it and what your relationship is to art making now.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It was very hard in the 1990s. and kind of pretty white, very white in Adelaide. And we'd had a lot of fights at the art school about the theory, the compulsory theory, which didn't include any Indigenous real content. We never had any Aboriginal people come and speak to us as authority, and so I found it really hard. So I just went and worked with my community, and also in an Aboriginal sense, I was very young. I just was young, and so when in my community context, I just needed to listen for a long time to my elders. But art is also about making mistakes and making experiments and being it's okay. You don't have to be right. And I think creativity as a method, as a process, it becomes so important at a time in the world when it seems to be being squeezed out of everything. So I would say my relationship to art making is different now. I thought it was really superficial, and it can be, but it's also a really useful way of communicating ideas and emotions other than writing and words. And it's such a beautiful way that is really familiar to our communities. Like, a lot of my community are really talented creatively, but we don't see people at the university necessarily. So I guess the whole relationship to how the academy treats art is probably different to how our community, what the values that our community have in relation to creativity, which is just part of life. And everyone's multidisciplinary and creative, and you can have a go at everything. It's wide open for you. I don't know if that answers that question. Yeah, but that's how I feel about it now. I feel very much like everyone should be creative. And I make all the students do creative work and they freak out. I'm like, yeah, you're going to have to take a risk. They're like, oh, no, we're not, that's not out. I'm like, yeah, well, just have a go, because it's actually about, it's a muscle or whatever. It's a creative, it's hard to get your creative voice to what you think in your head and what you want to have. It takes a long time to be able to really articulate properly. It takes a long time. You need lots of love and support for that. Yeah. Anyway, anyone else want to? Okay. Deadly, I'm gone.
Thank you so much. Yeah, round of applause again. Thanks so much.